Okay, 6th grade remote students, we're going to pick up with where we left off on the last video where we looked at all the different note values and rests. We are only going to be talking about those 5 notes and rests: whole note, half note, quarter note, eighth note, 16th note, and the equivalent rest. There are lots of other notes. We just don't really have time or a need to really cover that much right now, okay? So let me review very quickly. We've got a whole note, looks like an oval, and it equals 4 beats. And if I draw my circle over here, and I have 4 as being the value of that, that whole note gets the entire circle, gets the entire measure of music, so it gets 4 beats. If I draw a whole note and add this line to it, remember that that line is called a stem. And I've now divided my whole note in half, which means I've divided 4 into 2 parts, which would give me 2. So there's my circle divided in half. If I draw a half note again and fill it all in and add my stem to it, so this is my half note with the note head filled in, I've now divided my measure of music, or my circle, into 4 parts or quarters, which is where the name comes from. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got 4 quarters in there, and each one of those quarters is equal to 1. And the 4 ones together add up to a total of 4. Okay? If I take my quarter note and now add this thing to the side of it called a flag, I've now divided my measure up, or my circle, up into 8 parts. So I'm going to use a different color here. So I've got 1, 2 lines to divide this up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 parts. And each one of those 8 parts, since this was worth 1, now each one of those parts is worth a half. So each one of these is a half. So my eighth notes are worth 1/2 of 1 beat. And then if I divide my circle in half again, let's use a different color, blue this time. I'm going to divide that in half, that in half, that in half, and that in half. And now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 pieces. So I take my eighth note and I add 2 flags to the side of it. And we call them 16th notes because there are 16 of them. And each one of these, here's my single beat again, is right here. Each one of these is now worth 1/4 of that single beat that was there. I'm not going to draw those all the way around, but this is 1/4 of 1 beat. Okay? And then if you remember, we also had rests that went along with them. So this was my whole rest, which is a box hanging underneath a line. My half rest is just the opposite. So these two look alike, but they're the opposite. This is easy to remember because it looks like a hat and half both start with H. So the one that looks like a hat is a half rest, the other one is a whole rest. My quarter rest is this squiggly thing. My eighth rest looks like a 7. And my 16th rest has 2 lines on it, just like there are 2 flags here. We have 2 flags on the 16th rest. So a whole rest means you rest for the whole measure and not play anything. A half rest means you rest for 2 beats. Quarter rest means you rest for 1 beat. Eighth rest means you rest for a half a beat. 16th rest means you rest for 1/4 of a beat. Okay? I'm going to take this and shrink it up and put it over here in, oops, let me get this again. put this over here in the corner. There we go. Just so we have this available to look at. So let me move this up here in the corner. So now when we're actually writing music, go back and get my black marker. I'm going to draw a single line. Now we'll use a music staff later on when we actually start reading notes, but right now for rhythms we only need a single line. And I'm going to add a line at the beginning called a bar line. And then I'm going to put one at the end too. And then I'm going to put other ones in the middle to divide my music up into parts. And those parts, the space in between each one of these, are called measures. And what they do, they're kind of like punctuation. They just help us divide the music up into pieces and make it easier to read. Okay? At the beginning, I'm going to put two numbers, and this is called the time signature. Now, we could spend weeks and weeks and weeks just talking about time signatures and all different combinations of numbers. For what we're going to do, we're only going to use 4/4 time. And what it tells us is the top number tells us that we have 4 beats in a measure, and the bottom number tells us that a quarter note gets one of those beats. And that's what this is based on. A whole measure is 4 beats, and a quarter note gets 1 beat. So we're going to use 4/4 time. If I draw a rhythm, now we can count the rhythm. Each measure has 4 beats in it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And at each bar line, when you get to each bar line, you're going to start over again with 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So each measure has 4 beats in it. And then the rhythm is how those beats are put together. So if I start with a half note, it's going to last for these 2 beats. And then if I do a quarter note, it's going to last for this beat. It's equal to 1. And then another quarter note is going to last for this beat. So this would be counted as 1, 2, that gets 2 of the beats, and then 3, 4. If I did something different here, if I did 2 eighth notes, these 2 eighth notes, each one of them gets half of this beat, the first half and the second half, and we call the second half the and. So this is counted as 1 and, I'll do 2 more eighth notes here. So we've got 2 and remember this line on the top makes it easier to read, so I could have written those notes like this as separate eighth notes, but instead I'm going to write them like this with this line across the top called a beam. And that just makes it easier for us to read the music. Okay? And then I'm going to do a half note here, and this half note lasts for those 2 beats. Then for this measure, I'm going to do 4 16th notes. I'm going to put 4 notes together here that are a quarter of a beat each. So they each get a quarter of beat 1. So these are going to be counted as 1, E, and A. So this is 1, E, and A. Whoops, there we go. And then I'm going to do 2 eighth notes here. So we're going to count this as 2 and again remember our 16th notes, we can either write them like this, where they're all separate, or we can write them grouped together like they are on my staff so that I can read them a little easier. I just take all the flags and put them into 2 beams across the top. And then do a quarter note here for 3 and a quarter note here for 4. And then for my last measure, I'm going to do a whole note that gets all 4 beats. It lasts for the whole measure. So this rhythm, if I clap it, would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 and a 2 and 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And because my whole note lasts for the whole measure, I only clap on beat 1, and then it would hang on through the whole measure. okay? So that's how we count simple rhythms, and those are just notes. I'll do another one that has some or some rests in it, so you can see how the rests are grouped together. And the next video I'm going to record is just going to have a whole bunch of different rhythms, so you can see how to count them out and how they sound when we clap them, okay?